Hi, welcome to today's session on as part of our cookie series. My name is Caroline Carver and I'm Principal Consultant at Three Black Cats. So this session follows on from last week when we talked about the banners and cookies and what was required in the various countries. Today we're going to talk about how we test and optimize our banners and why we might want to do that. So first up, why do we think about banner performance and why does it actually matter to us? Okay, might just look like a little pop-up at the bottom of the window, whether people click on it or not, it's a choice they make, and maybe we've got to have it there for compliance for a lot of countries. But what does it actually mean? So the consents that people provide in those banners to do things like drop cookies, trigger those pixels we were talking about last time, are the things that enable you as an organization to collect information and provide it to downstream systems. So for example, if we think about Google marketing, which lots of organizations use, the ability to drop that Google tag onto or cookie onto the person's device then enables you to identify that person in your Google audiences and then allows you to do things like remarket to those people. So you actually know your audience size and can push through to them. Same for things like the Facebook cookies, etc. If we think about non-marketing examples, if people don't accept the cookies, for example, we may not be able to see how they're navigating our website. So we may not be able to see the pain points we have on our website, for example. Or we lose visibility of how many people have visited a particular page on our website. So we don't know what products or services are of more interest or less interest to people. So we really do want, in most cases, for people to agree to accept the cookies, ideally all of them, but particularly certain categories of them. And we're saying a really small change to your cookie banner can have a huge impact in how many people will accept cookies. So simple things like changing the color of it can take your acceptance rate from up sort of 10-15% for it. So it is really important to make sure that you have it as optimized as you can do. And that's not about how many people say yes or no. That's so that you get those downstream impacts to your business to make sure that it's carrying through and being useful to you. So let's think about that a bit more on what impacts on whether people consent or not. Okay, now there is a concept of banner fatigue. Don't get me wrong. When GDPR in particular came out and every website had a banner on it, people were like, oh, I'm really fed up of seeing this banner, click, click. I'm just not engaging with it, etc. We have seen that has changed since GDPR has come through, and people now are quite aware of their rights and making informed choices about what they want to do. Now, that is absolutely not all of the population. There will be a vast amount of the population where it's like, get rid of this goddamn banner, don't want it, make it go away. And that's where it's really important, for example, we were talking last time about that ability to remember your consent. So not have it pop up every time I come to your page. That's really, really annoying. If I said yes last time, give me the option of changing it somehow, but don't pop the banner up again, at least for a year until my consent has sort of lapsed off a bit. Okay. Now, the difference is if there is a significant change, then you may need to seek reconsent. When I say significant change, that is things like we are going to start and sell your data in a way that's maybe not aligned with how we previously have, for example. So maybe I do want to reconsent to that to make sure that everyone is fully informed of it. But in general, once I've said yes to the cookie ban or no, whichever choice I wanted, then I shouldn't see it again for a year. Okay. Gets rid of that fatigue of me seeing it all the time. So now we're only popping it up, hopefully the first time we visit. What impacts on the consents we have? So first and foremost, the consent model. We're going to talk a lot more about this in a minute, but that's whether we use opt-in, opt-out, scroll to consent, explicit consent, those sort of choices. We then have the design and the layout. So this is whether it's at the bottom of the screen. Is it rectangle? Does it have curvy corners? Yellow, green? Does it blend in? Wording. Okay, is it short and punchy? Do I actually understand with it? Or does it look more like the lawyer rated dictionary and it looks super legal and it's put me off from wanting to engage with it at all? We then have things about the buttons. I'm going to talk more about this and how button architecture can impact, but also what we need for the various jurisdictions, because not every button is needed everywhere. Things about the timing of the banner. Does it come up straight away? Or is it actually really laggy? And if it's really, really laggy, people tend not to engage with it. But also, am I forced to engage with that banner before I can do anything on your website? Or can I actually ignore it, sit it at the bottom of your screen and never engage with it? And that comes down to that banner functionality on it. And we're saying on that one, if I can leave the banner at the bottom of the screen or even on the side and not be forced to engage with it, your uptake of people who engage with it will be likely about 20%. Okay, because you're not made me engage with it, so I haven't made any decision. I didn't accept all, I didn't reject all, I just left it hanging. Now, in some countries, that's not a problem. Like we spoke about last time, we'll talk about the consent model and what that means in a minute. But for places like Europe, where you need that explicit consent, having it sit there with nothing as a consent, you've lost an awful lot of that market where we could have actually encouraged them to say, actually, I will accept all, rather than making 0 choices on it. So let's talk about these consent models. So we have a couple of different consent models for cookie banners that are used sort of internationally. So we have the opt-out model. So this means that the cookies drop onto the individual's browser, computer, unless they say no. Okay, so in this model, all the cookies, first time I go to the website, all the cookies will drop. If I then say, oh, actually, I don't like that, and I go reject all, next time I come to the website, only the strictly necessary ones will drop. Okay, so you've had that first time visit where you have managed to get all cookies onto that website, onto that device. Okay, so that is the model that is required in New Zealand and Australia. Okay, people can say, no, don't want it. Cool, okay, we'll do that next time you ask. We then have opt-in explicit consent. So this is the other extreme. This is where nothing other than strictly necessary can be dropped. And if we want to drop anything else, if we want to drop marketing or functional, the person has to explicitly say yes. So they have to click a button to say, I want this to happen. Okay, so that is the model for Europe. Now, UK, I mentioned last time, is subtly changing at the moment. There is going to be the ability to drop some performance cookies without that explicit consent. But the keywords are some, and it's certainly not your marketing ones. So that's sort of the opposite end of the extreme from that opt-out model. We then have a model in the middle, which is the opt-in implied consent. So cookie banner comes up, hasn't dropped any cookies other than strictly necessary. But if I then navigate away from the banner, or I scroll up and down the page or click somewhere else, it takes that movement, should we say, as my consent. Because I didn't say no, I have obviously said yes. Okay, so then it means you can then drop all of those. So if the banner pops up at the bottom, strictly necessary only. I scroll up the page, banner disappears, all the cookies have been dropped. Okay. So that is quite commonly used in a lot of US states. And as I mentioned last week, not every US state has the same rules. Some of the US states have opt-out like rules. Some have no rules. You don't have to show a cookie banner at all. A lot have the opt-in implied consent, and there are 2 states with explicit consent required. So when we think about the design of our cookie banner, if we think about ourselves as a global organization, we could have one cookie banner model, should we say, for the world. Unfortunately, if we do work in Europe, so if our business is subject to GDPR, our cookie banner is going to be opt-in explicit consent across the world. So the ramifications of that are in New Zealand and Australia, you're going to get an awful lot less people opt in. And part of that is also about the button architecture. So if we want to achieve the maximum opt-in we can, which is usually what our business outcome we're seeking is, we most probably want to have a different model used for different countries. Now, this is where tooling, cookie tooling comes in particularly. A lot of products, say websites, offer the ability to have a cookie banner show up. What they don't offer is that ability to put geolocation rules on to say, in this case, behave like this, in this case, behave like that. So it doesn't give you that ability to have the opt-out on those lower restriction countries. So we might well want to have different rules for different countries. So we might have these 3 sets set up as options. We might have a no banner option even. And then we will say, based on the IP address of the user who's visiting our website, we will do the following with the banner. So if they're coming from Europe, we will apply opt-in explicit consent. So we will not drop all the cookies. We'll show the banner. It will remain there. When they click on it, then we can drop the other cookies. Counter to that, if they come from New Zealand, we will drop all the cookies unless they say otherwise. Okay, so we can see how we've gained that percentage through for particularly New Zealand and Australia. Okay, so we've now decided how our banner is going to behave in terms of dropping those cookies. We then need to think about how we want our banner to look. So we have a whole bunch of choices on our banner, and nothing in the legislation says how your banner has to look. So a couple of things to think about is making sure it's on brand. If your banner kind of looks like a weird, cheap add-on, most people aren't going to trust it. Most people won't engage with it because they're like, I don't know. Is this kind of part of this service or not? Okay, so make sure it's in your brand colors. Make sure it's appropriately worded in your tone of voice for your organization. And we'll talk more about words in a minute. So our banner, common places we see the banners pop up at the bottom of the page. Yep, it's kind of not in the way. I can see the whole page. It's not where my eye is drawn to though. So I'm maybe not thinking about engaging with it there because it's not blocking anything. Maybe I've got it at the top of the page is another choice. Again, I can see the whole page. I'm not really forced to engage with it. We could have it in the middle of the page, and that's quite common. So rectangle or curved rectangle in the middle. It's right in my eye line. I'm going to have to engage with it now because it's right there. Equally though, some people have it pop up on the left, on the right as a floating panel. The right-hand side appears to be quite popular at the moment to have it floated up. As I say, there is no right or wrong place to have it. However, do watch where it pops up, that it isn't blocking other things that you're legislatively required to have. So particularly those of you that need icons for accessibility, etc., make sure your cookie banner doesn't block your accessibility icon. What, in terms of our banner popping up, can we think about? So we need to think about not only how it looks on a desktop, but how does it look when I navigate to your website on a smartphone, for example? And more individuals are using smartphones or little tablets, etc., to engage with your site. So it needs to be appropriate and checked in that site as well. Also thinking about how would it appear if I was using a screen reader. So if I'm using a screen reader, can I actually engage with it? Have I put the right tags on so that someone with one of these devices can actually work out what's going on? Or have I actually made it completely so my site can't be used? So when we think about what layout we want, it will depend on your organization, and it is definitely worth testing some choices out. Some of those tools, as I said previously, that allow us to have different models for different geolocations, allow you to have different locations for your banner or different shapes for your banner for different countries. So maybe in New Zealand, Australia, where it's an opt-out model, I'm okay with it being quietly at the bottom. Might actually encourage even less people to opt out. But actually in Europe, where I want people to, or I need people to engage with the buttons, maybe I want it right in the middle. Okay, so maybe we can use those tools to select what design banner we want for that location. There is also absolutely some functionality behind this that can force you to engage with that banner. So some of the tools available mean that you can actually mask, in effect, the contents behind the banner, or prevent people from scrolling or clicking anywhere other than the banner. Now, the advantage to that in countries which need explicit consent is that when I'm forced to engage with the banner, I will pick a button. It may not be as appropriate for countries with opt-out requirements, because maybe I actually don't want them to engage with the banner as much. Maybe I'm actually happy with it being at the bottom. And that comes down to a personal choice for your organization, but it has a really direct impact on people's uptick on being forced to do it. Okay, so for Europe, for example, it can be the difference between sort of 15% of people engaging with your banner, going up to about 80% of people engaging with your banner. So definitely have a think about, for those non-opt-out countries, do you want to force people to do that engagement? And again, legislatively, that's a choice you have. There is nothing that says you have to have people engage with the banner on it. So, how many words should we have on our banner? We need to have enough words that it makes sense to people what you're asking for. So in most cases, we will have a link to our privacy statement in it. We generally want it to be approachable and understandable by people. So we're generally aiming for that sort of number 3 option of informative. Tells us what we need to do, tells us how to engage with it, but it doesn't look so scary in terms of depth of words or complexity of words that I don't want to engage. Okay, so the idea of the wording is to tell people what's going to happen and what their choices are. So absolutely, if you want to configure, I know, marketing on, marketing off, etc., what we need you to do is engage with manage your preferences. Now, some countries have requirements for explicit words, particularly the USA. There are requirements to make it clear to people how to opt out of selling their data. So that is quite often where we have additional words that says something like, if you wish to opt out of selling your data, turn off marketing cookies. Okay, that needs to be in that first bit. Now, what language should we have our banner in? Always an interesting one. if you want people to engage with it, it needs to be in the language that they speak. So thinking about making your banner only available in English to your French website, where most people presumably are going to speak French, is not going to be helpful. Nobody's going to know what they're doing. Most people won't click on the right buttons, etc. You're going to get poor quality data. Some legislation requires it to be available in the native language of the country. So definitely be careful of that. Things like Canada, Quebec, if you're doing business there, requires it to be in English and French. So what a lot of the tools available do is you have your banner, you work it out in English for most of us, what you want to say. And then it can either auto-translate or you can build translations for it. And it picks up the language of the user's browser. So if I set my browser into French, it will then present me the cookie banner in French. That way it's driven on my preference completely, not the country it's coming from. You can have it driven off the country the IP is from, but you know, if I'm an English speaker living in France, my French is poor, I can tell you. I would most probably be more likely to engage if it was made available to me in English. So thinking about how you get those done, if you are needing to do multi-language, make sure that your cookie banner words line up in all languages, because you're going to flow those consents through to your back-end system. So you don't want to have, oh, the person thinks they agreed to this sort of marketing in English, but actually they agreed to this other sort in French. Now, what are we going to do with these consents at the back end when all we know is there's a consent for marketing? We won't know what to do. So do make sure absolutely that you keep them in step for it. In terms of other choices you've got, the concise language, if you've got a super easy website that only has like 2 cookies and a really simple one, maybe you can get away with that concise wording. Minimal wording is usually not legislatively going to be okay. We use cookies. Okay, what did that tell me about this? Nothing. Didn't tell me what my options were, didn't tell me why, didn't give me any clues as to what I could do for it. Okay, so I'm now being forced to click through to get that information I should have legislatively been provided with. So, buttons. What buttons do we want? Buttons and button architecture are a bit of an art form. They absolutely have a huge impact on your uptake. There is nothing in any of the legislation that says what shape the buttons need to be. There are pieces in some of the legislation that says the buttons can't be so goddamn hard to find because you made them so small that you can't engage with them. That will be a deceptive pattern. We can't do that. Depending on your countries you're targeting, certain countries have different rules. So if we think about GDPR, our most harsh requirement, for there we have a requirement that we have a reject all button on the banner as well as an accept all. So the reason for that is it needs to be as easy to say no to everything as it is to accept all. There is also a requirement for Europe that the button for accept all can be no more enticing than the button for reject all. So the button for accept all can't be 4 times the size of reject all. Also generally avoiding like them being red and green, where green's the choice you want to make. It's most probably misleading. If you want to make one, I know, sand color and one slightly purple, you could argue about whether that's encouraging one way or another at that point. What most people do is they make the accept all and the reject all button the same color. That way you don't get into legislative arguments about which one is more encouraging than the other. And then the other button we always have is manage my preferences. So, as I say, for Europe, we need that reject all button. For the rest of the world, there is not a requirement to have that reject all button. So when we think about that, if we are forcing someone to make a choice, most people want to make one button click. Okay, so they either go accept all or reject all. Most people won't go manage my preferences, then click on and off on the various items. So if I offer a reject all button to people outside of Europe, you usually have about 20% of people who will click reject all. If you do not offer that reject all button, your clicks on reject all, when you have to go manage my preferences and reject all, get closer to sort of 3 to 5%. So it makes a significant difference on whether you offer that reject all button. Now, some organizations will say, actually, we want people to be 100% able to choose, and we want to offer that ability in the same way for Europe to the rest of the world. Other organizations were like, yeah, we've offered it, but we don't want to make it too easy because actually it's in our interest for marketing to not have everyone reject out. Okay. For USA, there are requirements, particularly on the button for cookie settings, on what it should be called. So in most cases, it's been guided that it should be manage my privacy, but there are some other choices that are acceptable in that guidance that can be used. The key thing for that one is it needs to encourage people to be like, this is the place to go if I want to change my settings. Okay. Most banners, we have just the accept all, manage my privacy, maybe a reject all button. However, you can have a banner more like that top one, where rather than manage my privacy, we give people the toggles there and then on the banner. The downside of this one is the banner's quite a lot more cluttered. The upside is if you are an organization where people are constantly clicking in to manage my privacy, you have made it available to people without that extra button click. Okay, so it will be very much horses for courses. And like the other things, you may well want different buttons for different jurisdictions, because you might, as I say, not want that reject all button for the whole anywhere outside of Europe, for example. So how do we then go about thinking and testing our performance? So like I said, banners, the first test is, did it pop up when I wanted it? Cool, tick. We're then going to want to test things like what percentage of people actually accepted the banner, who rejected all, who just sat there and did nothing about the banner, and then also who selected certain categories only. So we're looking at what percentage of people went, I would like strictly necessary, functional, and preference, but I really don't want the marketing. Okay, because that might be the thing that's actually important to us as a business. And as I said earlier, it has a huge impact on our audience size for things, particularly if you're a marketing-led organization, for things around audience size, remarketing, campaign effectiveness. So it is quite important to understand those metrics here. Now, the bit we also didn't talk about previously when we're talking about those models is that piece that we spoke about last week about the do not track and global privacy controls. So those were those options that I can set in my banner, in my browser as a user to say what I want to do. And again, we said last time, the global privacy control is required in the US and a lot of states, particularly California. It is not a requirement in other countries. However, if I have gone to the effort of setting my global privacy control as hell no, don't want to deal with you, don't want marketing, etc., most probably we should honour it, because if not, we're most probably going to be wasting our marketing spend on giving me ads because I really didn't want it, and I might actually churn my customers anyway based solely on that because I just didn't want it. So we might think about, do we want our banner to enable that global privacy control for all countries and accept them and honour them? Or do we only want it to do it for the countries where it's mandated? Again, do not track, similar concept. It isn't required legislatively in any country, but it is being considered as a signal, particularly in Europe, for the person's consent and the fact they didn't want to be tracked. So again, we need to make that decision. Do I want to honour it, etc.? And when we're making those decisions, we need metrics to do it. So we need to think about how do we track each of those numbers and use it. And that's where tooling is absolutely of benefit to you. So these are some metrics. These are pulled from OneTrust, which is a really common tool for cookie banners. So we can see here we've got a global, we've got about 68% of people opting in, got about 24% opting out, and we've still got that 6.7% of people who did nothing. Now, you will never get, even if you force people to engage with the banner, that 6.7% much lower than about 5%. The reason you will not get it any lower than about 5% is that bots come to your website and they literally just land and leave. Other people just browse into your website, take one look and leave. They don't engage with the banner. They don't engage with anything on your website, etc. AI agents coming over, etc. So you will never chase that down to zero, nor would I suggest you spend a long time trying. If it's any more than 10%, you most probably want to have a look and go, why is it that high for it? And that might be that business decision I said. So if I set up a banner for New Zealand and I didn't want to force people to engage with it because I'm on an opt-out model, I would be absolutely stoked if that number was like 90% of people didn't engage with it. Great. That meant they were all opted in. Wonderful. If it was 90% in Europe, I would be worried because I have lost all of that audience. So it is very much with these metrics about understanding what you are looking at and what the norm you are expecting in that region is. Now, I said about different jurisdictional differences. So in New Zealand, Australia, generally the opt-in rate when forced to engage with a banner, somewhere up the 90% mark, sometimes higher depending on your brand. For Europe, if you get to about 75% opt-in, you're doing really well. And that's just because of the different legislation and the different cultures of those different countries. So when you're looking at Europe and you're thinking, oh man, it's only 75%, yeah, don't despair. That's good. Maybe there's something we can do it to move it from 75 to 80, maybe. But we're most probably never going to get it up that 90+% mark on it. Other things we might be looking at is those next set of figures down. So things like who's opting out and how are they opting out? So you can see on this one, we've got quite a high rate of people opting out with the do not track and the global privacy control. Now, again, consider what your business is. That might be that it's actually quite heavily US weighted, and that can be what's triggering it. For this particular product, I can actually drill this down to which country the user has come to. So I can see, for example, the percentage opt-in rates for people visiting from the USA are this versus France. So I can actually drill right down into my metrics to understand it. And I also want to be looking at what are happening with my consent rates over time. So as I said, that first time the banner goes on, people engage with it. Then after a year, it generally pops up again, asking people to re-engage with it. What I'm looking for is markers in things like trust and confidence in my business. I shouldn't see my consent rate starting to fall away. That means possibly I'm doing something with those people who used to opt in if my consent percentage is dropping away and people are actually sort of starting to click and opt out and change their preferences, maybe there's something in my marketing or something in the wording that I've changed my banner that's starting to sort of put people off from wanting to opt in. So that might be something I want to explore on this one. So if we look at this one here, something has happened in this sort of last bit here that seems to have dropped off a bit. It's not a huge drop, can be seasonal. Oddly, when people have got more time over Christmas, etc., they engage a bit more fully. So you do see seasonal drops in your banners. But if this continued to be a trend, I didn't see it come back up, I might want to explore what's different. What have we changed recently on our banners? So how do we get people to maximize these consents? So I said first, measurement is key. We can't maximize our consents and our banners unless we actually know what percentages we're dealing with and what countries, etc. that is. Now, first and foremost, the best way of maximizing our consents is to optimize our consent model. So that is by country. So that is the opt-out model for New Zealand, Australia versus the explicit opt-in for Europe. Maybe in the US, we want to have that implied consent running, so we don't have to have it at Europe standard. That will make a huge difference to your consents alone, just on that. Then when we think about it, then we think about our banner layout. Okay, so I spoke earlier about that reject all button. Not having the reject all button for anywhere other than Europe makes a huge difference, but also not forcing people to engage with the banner in New Zealand and Australia makes a difference, quite a difference. So it is that testing it out, seeing what changes it. And a lot of these tools that we can use to make cookie banners, etc., have the ability to do A/B testing. So by that, I mean, I can configure it to show anyone coming from, I don't know, let's take New Zealand, for example. A quarter of the people coming from New Zealand are forced to engage with the cookie banner. Quarter are not forced to engage with it. Quarter it's at the top of the page, quarter it's on the side of the page. And I can actually look at it and go, well, actually, that one on the side of the page was actually gave me an extra, I don't know, 5% click rate. Okay, right, let's stick with side of page for a bit. What happens if I make it a different color? What happens if I make the box a bit bigger? So maybe my next test is, okay, here's my 4 brand colors. Let me change the buttons a quarter to each brand color. Okay. When you're doing that A/B testing, though, change only one variable at once. Otherwise, you will be never knowing what is making the difference. So, for example, do a test with all your colors. Fine. Do your 6 brand colors, see which one performs best. Change the banner location as your next set of A/B testing. Top, bottom, left, right, middle. Then change the buttons as another test. So do it incrementally, one bit at a time, until you have worked out what is going to give you that best bang for buck. And as I say, you can build this quite complicatedly as a different setup for each country to give you that absolute maximum for those countries. Or you can have a generic cross-world one, etc. So where to next? So we need to think about making sure we are using the right tooling to get the most out of our banner. So that is about, do I want to be able to offer different roles for different countries? Do I have the ability to get those statistics I need so that I can choose which banner is best for me? And then we want to think about that banner design by country particularly, and working through that A/B testing. But first and foremost, before we start and worry about does our banner design encourage people to opt in, opt out, etc., from last week, we need to make sure our banner actually functions. So if I select opt out, whether it's a blue banner or a green banner, it still needs to opt me out and not drop anything but strictly necessary cookies. So the legislative requirements, first and foremost, you need to be focused on is only doing what the consents what asked to do. If you get that wrong, you are much more likely to get regulatory focus, or in the US, lawsuits from individuals, than you will about, the banner was blue, not green, etc. Okay. Oh, I didn't mention it last week, but definitely if you're doing business in the US, be very, very cautious with your cookie banners and what cookies and whether you're dropping them with the right consents. It is not generally the regulator who comes for you in the US. They can do. It is individuals. So individuals in the US can take individual actions or class actions over cookies. And it is really, really common. Okay. Organizations get many of these a year if their cookie banner is not working. And they're not, $5,000 kind of deals. They're quite often in the 50, 100K, 200K marks. Okay, so you don't want to have many of those. Could have paid for your cookie banner pretty quickly to get those resolved. So definitely when you're thinking about your risk profile, if you are doing business in the US, cookie banner is an absolute must on it. And as I said last time, it's not a set and forget. You need to test it regularly and make sure you are honoring those consents and you haven't done something that has pushed you out of compliance on those things. Okay, so that's all I have for today. I want to thank you all for attending. We'll open up the discussion. So if you go on the Q&A, if people have got questions, then go ahead either on this week or last week's stuff. More than welcome.